Welcome to the Mycelium Network podcast, a podcast for early-stage web developers and the mentors, teachers, and communities that help them along the way. Hey, Elena, and welcome to the Mycelium Network podcast.
Hi, Schalk. How are you?
I'm good. I'm pretty good, especially for a Monday. So let's just dive right into it. Please tell us more about yourself, your background, how you came to do what you do, what gets you up in the morning, and maybe share a favorite hobby of yours.
Yeah. So I'm Elena Lape. I'm the founder of Holopin, which is a digital badge and gamification platform. Mainly aimed at developers, so companies can issue digital badges to developers for various achievements, contributions, etc. And then folks can embed those in their GitHub, LinkedIn, Twitter, their own websites. So it's meant to be very cross-platform, and it doesn't use the blockchain. My own background is in software engineering and also running developer communities, building developer communities in the API space, in the Kubernetes, and so the cloud space. I used to also work at GitHub, where I ran partnerships for one of the biggest students programs in the world. So students could sign up to GitHub, get a bunch of free stuff, not just from GitHub, but from other companies. So those were the partnerships that I liaised with. I kind of got into, both software engineering and adjacent areas, so community building and other tech stuff, through partially hackathons. So at university, I went to a lot of developer events, building stuff over the weekend, as well as being part of other meetups and tech communities. As for hobbies, I've gotten into drums over the last, I'm looking at my drum set literally. I've gotten into drums over the last couple of years. So that's been fun. And it's a very good outlet for, if there are stresses in life. And I also wouldn't be a good CrossFitter if I didn't mention the fact that I do CrossFit. I have to live up to the stereotype. So, yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, I used to be in a band back in the day, and I was the lead guitarist, but every chance I got, I would jump on the drums. It's a ton of fun and definitely an outlet if you're like, especially the type of music we were playing, it was the perfect thing. If you just like, somebody else just take the rhythm and just forget about the lead, and I just want to do the drums this time.
What
and
music
it's like
did you
afterwards, like, we did death metal.
Wow.
So hard and fast stuff. Yeah. It was fun. Almost got a record deal. We were just a little too soon for South Africa, I think. So most of the record studios, when we got there, they were like, they put it on and they, no, I don't think so. They're like, oh, come on, you got to try this. Anyway, yeah. Roadrunner Records, come on, in the US, like, no, maybe you should contact them. I was like, okay, whatever. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I couldn't make it a career. Alas, one day I'll get some drums and start playing again. My daughter is very interested. So yeah, I'm definitely going to probably jump into that at some point.
Nice.
So as you mentioned, you have quite a bit of experience with developer communities, open source communities, and developer relations in general. So what makes for an impactful developer community?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that communities that are around similar benefits, or rather communities that benefit its members in some way, are the most impactful and useful. So not really audiences, not necessarily communities around like a product, or it could be around a product, but they should always feel personal and feel beneficial to the member, really. So to give some examples, if it's a community where developers can perhaps make a name for themselves in the open source, so they can, advance their career and have something on their portfolio. That's an example of a nice community. Somewhere where they can gain skills as well as network and meet people, so that they can further find opportunities to build cool stuff and learn even more skills, and just get inspiration from. Those are sort of the values and the traits of a community that I consider to be a good one.
Yeah, I agree. Laurent Yanier, I think I got it right. He mentioned about the fact that GitHub is actually the most successful social media company in a way with GitHub. And the reason he feels that they've been able to do a lot of things correctly or better than you would generally find on social media is exactly because of that fact, where there's a sense of co-creation and a sense of co-ownership that doesn't really exist that much on other social media platforms. I always found that interesting when you mentioned that. So yeah, I totally agree. Because, that's what open source really is. When you boil it down to it, it's a big community that just happens to make software.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned hackathons, and I know that you call it your gateway drug into programming.
Oh, yes.
What is it about hackathons that you find so engaging?
So for some context, I guess, a hackathon, the way that I understand it and the ones that I've participated in, are either a weekend-long or sometimes week-long events where people get together, either in teams, sometimes solo as well, just to build cool stuff. There will normally be some sort of a challenge. It's either organized by one company or a student community or a combination of commercial entities and non-commercial entities, sometimes just community organized. So if there are challenges, then folks, again, in teams work to solve them through software. So I got into hackathons really my first year of university. And it was, what was the first hackathon? I think I went to Glasgow. So I studied in Edinburgh. And I was like, okay, what's a hackathon? Well, I don't know. My friends are going, so I guess I'm going to go. And it was 48 hours of 300 people sitting in a room together, just coding and going around and chatting and, names of different frameworks and solutions and whatever being thrown around. And what I really liked about it was how many people I got to meet and how many technologies I got to try out. I mean, later in my life, I understood that, I barely scratched the surface there. But it's really, hackathons to me were a place where I could go and I could experiment and just build cool stuff. Competition, I'm a big fan of a little bit of competition at least. So you could win different prizes and as well as travel to different places. That was a big motivator as well. In fact, yeah, as a student especially, the fact that I got to visit different countries. I've been to hackathons in the US and Canada, various ones in Europe and Abu Dhabi. So for a student, that was a cool thing as well. And I think through there, I ended up meeting people with whom I then end up working, which is all the cool. And to this day, I stay in touch. It's just a phenomenon which I really remember dearly. And I still look for opportunities to participate when I can, either as a mentor or come in there and build stuff for the weekend.
Yeah. I wonder, So I can see how just that is enough. I mean, there's so much to it. There's the friendship, there's meeting people, there's networking, I guess, in a sense, depending if that's what you're looking for. There is the opportunity to play with different technologies, like you said, because, oftentimes you get people together and it's a diverse group and you're building something that ends up like, oh, I didn't know you knew how to do that. Well, maybe we can use Redis or something, and now somebody does something with Redis and you're like, oh, now you start looking at what they're doing. So you learn a little bit about it. So there's that, the learning, the contributing as part of a group. I wonder if you add to that a meaningful cause, like that would elevate it, I guess, to another level. And I have a sneaky reason why I'm asking that. I have this idea that I've been posing to some folks, and it sounds like it might actually be something worth trying out at least. And this is kind of the perfect thing for a hackathon, but you're going to need quite a few people that have different skill sets. The idea is basically like building a web extension, like a browser extension, that looks at the website that you're on, and then, like, say, for example, you've done a search because you've heard something about climate change and you're searching for a specific topic and you land on a site. Then it would have a look at the site's URL and it would grade it as a trusted source, as like, don't just take this as the truth, like do some additional research, or like, hit the back button immediately. This is probably fake news type thing. And I was thinking of doing a hackathon around that and seeing what one can come up with a couple of people over the course of a weekend. So that's kind of what I mean, like that kind of hackathon. Is that something that when you were still doing a lot of these, you would like jumped at the chance?
Yeah, I feel like I've even built like a fake news detector at some point. Browser extensions are great projects because it's fairly, let's say, compared to, I don't know, building like a self-driving car or something. It's something that you can ship over the weekend, more or less a complete product. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely hackathons which are, let's say, social impact focused. And it's either just this one challenge. So your idea, for instance, could be something like trying to come up with a good name or a theme there. The reliability of information, being genuine online, fake news detection hackathon, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, I think you could go to you could reach out to some student communities about that. Or look at DevPost. So DevPost is how lots of hackathons do their project submissions, because it makes it really easy for
Okay.
both organizers and for the participants, to assess it and submit it. But they also have a bunch of public hackathons, so you can see whether there's one where either your challenge could fit in, or maybe there are some existing ones that you could join. It's cool.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I'm definitely going to take that up. So there's an interesting thing that I read on I guess it's on your blog or somewhere in your bio, but you taught HTML and CSS to teenagers while in Panama.
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's quite a lot there. So I just would love to hear the story. Like, I don't have any specific questions. I would just love to hear how did that come about and what did you learn from that experience?
So there's a bit of a background story, which was that I moved to Panama at some point. I thought it was, I wanted to do the whole nomad thing. And I found myself living in a hacker house in the middle of a jungle overlooking a volcano in Panama. And I was looking for things to do and how I can potentially contribute to the community around me. And I found this charity, I believe, it was a charity called Raspberry Shake. So they're based in Boquete, Panama, and they mostly gather teenagers from neighboring villages and from Boquete itself to teach them about computers and about Raspberry Pis. So they've built their own desktops. They've got these like little cardboards, and I mean, there's also a screen, but completely self-built desktop computers running Raspberry Pi as the actual computer. And I bet the founder of that charity, Brandon, and we got talking, and turns out they've never done anything with web development, and that was something that I was, working in and familiar with. And I ended up doing a course on HTML and CSS for Panamanian teenagers. So they were about 13 to 17 years old, so quite a diverse group. But one thing they all had in common was that they weren't really used to computers. Like, most of them didn't have computers at home. So there was that sort of added challenge of, all the additional software things that needed to be shown or taught. And then the other thing was that I did that in Spanish, and it was also interesting having to explain what a div is in Spanish. But then that brings me to the next challenge, which is, even if I did explain it in Spanish, I think that's where I really saw like language is a problem, I think, in web development if you want to advance in your career. And it's almost disadvantageous to learn it in your own native language, because the second you're going to have to look up an error, or if you're going to want to collaborate on certain projects or join a company, which a lot of them now are remote or international, you're going to run into issues. So it was very interesting. It's a completely different experience to, let's say, workshops that I've done at like university or meetups or hackathons. But my goal there was essentially give folks exposure to, see if I could excite them about web, and, writing a bunch of code or something, whether it's divs or some CSS. We've done both. And having something pop up on a screen. They were very fascinated by iframes because they could embed YouTube videos in that. And yeah, that was the main project. Build your own kind of personal website or website about anything. And all that, I will also mention, all that was done on those Raspberry Pi computers. So
That's amazing.
Lots of fun.
Yeah, no, for sure. It blows my mind sometimes what the links people will go to when they're really interested in something or excited about something. I spoke to someone on this podcast from Nigeria, and he actually started learning on paper with books.
Wow.
So he would read the manual, the HTML thing, and then he would write it on paper and pretend that it would, run successfully. And then at some point, I can't remember. I think it was an uncle of his gave him an old, I think it was a BlackBerry Z80 or something like that, and literally started coding on that. And it's not the first time I heard somebody using like an old BlackBerry phone or something to actually use some of these sites that you're like, can it even run on that? And yeah, it's inspiring when you see that. Yeah, that must have been a really interesting experience. I spoke to some folks from Women Who Code on Friday, and Grecia, the one, mentioned the fact that she's trying to expand the amount of curriculum available in Spanish. Because, for a lot of these folks, having to also learn another language, like a spoken language, on top of learning a programming language. It's just this additional thing. And I totally get that fact where once you start trying to contribute to open source or something, that language thing might be a barrier. And when somebody mentions that, it always reminds me, years ago, I was like in the bank when you still did that. And I was like standing in the queue, and there was another person that was ahead of me, and they were at the counter, and they were talking to the person. And so in South Africa, we've got like 11 official languages. And this person spoke to somebody else, and they spoke in their language. And so the guy asked me an interesting question. He says, so when you're counting the money, do you count it in your language or do you count it in English? And the guy was like taken aback for a moment. And he was like, I counted in English. Weird. So it's so interesting how I think it talks a little bit to what you've mentioned there, where you taught it in Spanish, but now they have this potential barrier to entry when you go out in the world and everything is not, like the comments, the variable names, everything is in English. Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. I remember, so I went to middle school and some of high school in Lithuania. So one of the languages that we were introduced in were Pascal, and I remember it's a strange decision, but like there's a for loop and a while loop, but then the variable names and a lot of the other computer sciencey things that we were taught were in Lithuanian. But then if you want to look that up or like Google that, like you will not find, well, you will find some information, but it will not be as up to date, let's say, as in English. And then for any new tech that comes out, again, languages that aren't English kind of struggle to keep up, or it sounds unnatural. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, MDN WebDocs has that challenge because it's whittled down to English and 7 other languages. And one of the main reasons was that the other languages were just getting so far out of date that it was doing more harm than good to keep it online. Because,
Yeah.
and if you looked at the trend of somebody, so what would happen is you do a search, and then because your language is set to German, for example, it would direct you to the German version of that page. So it would be /de/whatever. But then the number of people that would immediately click on the little language selector and switch to English was so high that
Wow.
you would have been doing them a favor to just redirect to English by default. And it's literally because they knew that this content wasn't as up to date as the English content, because this is open web technologies, standards. These things move fast. HTML, a little more manageable, but like CSS and JavaScript, wow, this stuff evolves so quick that it's just so. The work that the translation community does on the 7 languages that still support it is just phenomenal. The amount of work they do to keep it up to date. And it's just because they have a pure passion for this. And for some of them, it's literally that. It's like if it wasn't available in, say, Chinese, they would be lost. They wouldn't be able to, like, it'll take them so much longer to learn the stuff, because they'll first have to understand just what is this language trying to tell me, just the English, over and above like understanding the concepts around JavaScript and CSS and these kinds of things. So that is for sure, that is a challenge. And I think translation tools has helped. I think maybe a lot of people that used to do the quick switch to English from German might be using Google Translate in the browser to do the translation right there. The problem is translating to translating to Asian languages is not good yet. Basically, early on, when the project was considering doing automated translations, we reached out to the community, and the Asian community was like, we'd rather start from scratch. Then you give us a auto-translated page and then just try and fix that. It'll be more work than just starting from the English. And so just like, okay, well, and then, so that's interesting. And apparently it's improved, but it's not there yet. So it's a problem, but I think it's solvable with time and technology. But in the meantime, these communities are doing just amazing work, keeping these things up to date. This is taking me down a rabbit hole because now I'm thinking of something else. Apparently, one of the reasons that Vue.js was so popular early in the days, in China specifically, is because Evan Yo, the person who started Vue, is from China. And so for him, it was critical to have the Vue documentation available in Chinese from the beginning. And that's essentially why Vue beat out React in China, is because they could access the documentation in their language. So that's
Today
very
I learned.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in that documentary that the Honeypot folks made,
Yeah.
the Vue.js documentary. I think it's mentioned in there. I was like, wow, that is powerful knowledge to know that. That it's literally, that's the difference. I have my own reasons why I prefer Vue, but that's different. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Okay, moving on. So, related to teaching, there's, I mean, we're technically drowning information on the web. Like, it doesn't really matter what your interest is. There is a lot of information online. So much so that that for a new web developer, it can be like overwhelming. And like, who do I trust? Like, who are the people that will tell me the right way or the proper way or the best way or the whatever you want to call it to build for the web today? So if you were starting today, what would your approach be to learning as a new web developer?
I
It's a
would
broad one,
do,
but
yeah, I would do the exact same thing I think as I did, which I will explain what that was. Um, technically I got into web development before the hackathons. Hackathons like really, really got me interested in building stuff. But generally, there are some very popular websites, I'll name 3, that have pretty much everything you need to get started. So Codecademy was one of the ones that I think I initially took up. Codecademy, yeah, great tutorials on whatever programming language that you want to take, including the web technologies. Free Codecamp has excellent courses. By the way, these are all kind of like structured. Both of those are very structured courses. So it's great if you feel like you need a bit of accountability or like someone to take your hand through all of it. And one other resource that I found particularly useful, kind of getting to that next step, was YouTube. I remember I was I learning, I think, how to build like a full stack application, so with a front end and back end. And I found this tutorial on how to do it with React and Firebase. And I think the tutorial was something like 15 hours long. So I took a whole week, but actually, just followed whatever they were doing, just literally copied, pause the video, copy the code, paste it. Okay, it doesn't work. Okay, let's see what's up here. And just having that exposure, like to the code, like actually seeing it and seeing someone walk through it and explain every bit, that helped putting some ideas and concepts in my head. Even if I didn't immediately understand them, you don't have to immediately understand everything. I think it just kind of slows you down. I'm very practical personally, and I think a lot of developers are. But eventually you will run into issue which will make you look it up. So it's totally okay to just kind of sometimes a bit blindly follow through it. And then for getting hands-on experience, so one thing that I recommend to new developers is going to maybe your local charities, whether it's like a charity shop or maybe an animal shelter, a coffee shop that you like, that, for instance, doesn't have a website, and you say, hey, I can build this for you. Initially, either do it for free coffee, essentially. It can be tons of fun. And I remember I kind of helped moderate, this was years ago, a website or even a forum, I think, for an animal shelter that I used to volunteer, which I eventually was, I think, kicked out of because they found out that I was very young. But that kind of, again, helped me gain exposure to what web looks like in the real life and how people use it. And whatever you build, doesn't matter if it's good quality, if it's like a small tutorial, big tutorial, if it's the website that you build for someone, really. It's great to put that on your GitHub and make the repo public. Just make sure that you conceal any sort of private information or passwords or API keys if you're at that stage where you're using them. But that serves as a good portfolio for what you've built. So then when you take up paid gigs, you'll be able to showcase something.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. And I think that's pretty much how I got started as well, for the most part. I also threw myself in the deep end over and over again, which I still do. And it's totally fine to not know everything. Nobody does. Some people pretend to, but they don't.
Oh yeah.
I especially like. So I took the. I forget the name, but Epic React from Kenzie Dodds, and it's one of the things he says constantly. And the thing is like, don't worry if you don't understand all of this right now. It'll click eventually, and that's very, very true. Like, don't feel that you need to spin your wheels on this one thing because you don't quite grasp it. Like, continue onwards, and like also don't go too far because you might not be able to find where you started again. But don't just spin your wheels on one thing, because that gets frustrating and you might lose interest, because you're gonna start doing the thing that we do as humans, which is you're going to point the finger at you. And you're going to say, I'm too stupid. This is not meant for me, da-da-da. And just don't. Just keep going. You'll figure it out. It's fine. This brings me to another topic. Like, I spoke to somebody on Discord during last week. And they were talking about the fact that they're not sure if they still want to write technical blog posts because of ChatGPT. And I was like, oh boy, okay. I understand where you're coming from. I understand what you're saying, but let's look at it from a different perspective. And every blog post that's written, if you truly write it yourself, it's fine if you use some of these tools to assist you and maybe getting started or something. But at the end of the day, it's something that you wrote, either because you experienced some challenge and you fixed and you got over it and you fixed it and it's working and you're excited and you write about that, or it's just some knowledge you've gained you want to share. The thing is, if you truly write it yourself, each post by each different person is as unique as their personality. And the cool thing about that is, instead of having a generic answer that something like a chatbot will give you, you could read 4 different blog posts, and at the 4th one, you just click suddenly, because the way that person thinks and therefore the way they explained it matches you and how you think and how you understand things. So, that's something that I think is important, that people realize that these tools are powerful and useful, sure, but I think the human thing and the way that you would explain it is still very, very valuable.
100%. And also, just doing the uncomfortable is what makes you get better at something. Like, whether it's writing or it's web development or really probably any skill in life, like when you look back at your life and moments where you learned the most and when you advanced the most, like those are the ones that felt really uncomfortable and really sometimes even desperate in time. It's just going to feel great at the end. Like, you're going to get better. You can be really good at guitar, or you can be really good at Wonderwall if you constantly keep just playing Wonderwall. But in order to advance, you need to go through the uncomfortable. But that's the hard bit.
For sure. Yeah. all of our history locked up in our brainstem is pushing against that. Like,
Yeah.
don't go to the uncomfortable thing. Do the comfortable thing that's familiar. But yeah, no, for sure, you grow when you put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. I mean, for me, for example, holy cow, I don't even know how long ago. Maybe it's even 10 years ago. No, it can't be that long. Maybe it is. I went to Venezuela and spoke at a Ruby conference about Firefox OS. And I did a couple of things in that was like, I did live coding, which is already scary in any talk because, you never know. And then I added on top of that, like pushing to a GitHub repo, deploying it, taking a photo of the audience and tweeting it from the phone.
Nice.
And so all of that was really, really uncomfortable. When I went on stage, I was like, there's so many things that can go wrong here. But now it's one of my fondest memories ever of any talk I've ever done.
Yeah.
So it shows you, like, I put myself in a really uncomfortable situation, like a foreign country, everything was weird. And I put myself way in the deep end. And yet that's the one I remember more than anything else. So yeah, I think that I 100% agree. Like, put yourself in uncomfortable situations. You'll learn from them and you'll grow because of it.
Yeah. Not sure how we got here, but I mean, I completely agree. Oh, with the technical writing or coding or competing with
Yeah.
AI or just leveraging it,
Hmm. Hmm.
doing something new or different is hard.
Yeah, for sure. And something else that's hard for a lot of people is contributing to open source. So while I believe that open source has a role to play, an important role to play, as part of your learning path, like anytime, but especially like when you're new, it can play a pivotal role. I think a lot of it shares a lot of the similarities that you've raised around hackathons. But it can, like an hackathon, be daunting and a little scary. Any advice for those thinking of contributing to open source, but they're like, not sure, a little scared?
So I'm gonna go back to everything. Well, ignore everything that I've just said. You don't. It doesn't have to be difficult, or it doesn't have to be hard. No, but really, when people I think about open source, they immediately, well, contributing to open source, they think about contributing to Node.js or contributing to JavaScript, kind of these like, all the big open source names that we know. The reality is that there are tons of open source projects and not even code that you can contribute to, whether it's for your portfolio or you want to get better at something or just want to learn about open source. So first place to look at and something that I really like to do, honestly. When I discover documentation that, for instance, doesn't quite make sense or something is not documented and then you have to find answers in like Stack Overflow. This concerns like framework documentation, programming language documentation. Maybe it's a small library for something. You can always, if it's open source, they will usually also have the documentation open source. So you can either create an issue on GitHub referencing those lines with a suggestion of what it could be improved to, as well as why it should be done. That's super helpful for maintainers. And having been in the open source for a while, folks who are leading projects often don't need code contributions per se. Like they welcome them, but also for libraries that are really, really large, they have teams and they have engineering managers and they have folks who assess the priorities based on 2,000 issues that are already open. But those small improvements really, really make a difference. And it's fine because you're still contributing to a project. Looking specifically at GitHub, if you're looking for ways to contribute, There is a good first issue tag. So if you just search for it on GitHub, you will find issues and pull requests that are flagged by maintainers as something that should be quite beginner friendly. And those are a combination of, again, code contributions and non-code contributions. I think it's a really good time for that and generally for getting into open source. We're seeing a lot of commercial products open sourcing parts of their code. Twitter just open sourced the algorithm. I was going to mention that when you said that GitHub is a social network. I don't know. Have you seen the issues? Have you seen the issues and the pull requests?
I have not. No, I haven't looked
Oh
at it
my
at
God. Okay, you're
all.
missing out. You are
Okay.
missing out.
Okay. I'll
It
go check
is,
it out.
okay. I mean, it's a bit of a, yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely
Hmm.
not like traditional GitHub issues. Um, it's just people posting pictures of their cats.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
People asking to replace mentions of Elon with mentions of Zuckerberg, or was it Zagberg? Um,
Oh,
it's, I
oh,
mean,
okay.
seems like an April Fool's joke, but it isn't. Um, why was I saying this? Oh yeah. Commercial open source. Yeah. So especially startups also that are venturing out into the open source world, search for it on Twitter, not Twitter algorithm, but on Twitter, the social media, looking for contributors, etc. And they're usually quite welcoming in their communities and their Discord. And if you're looking for a particular event where you feel like you could get, if you would benefit from additional support or that sort of community vibe and accountability, every
Hmm.
year in October, DigitalOcean organizes an event for 150,000 people called Hacktoberfest. And so then during that month, you can basically on GitHub search for repositories, so projects that are tagged with Hacktoberfest, as well as different issues, so folks that issues that need help, and take up some of those challenges. They can be quite beginner friendly, and if you do well, you might even get or if you do anything, might even get a Holopin badge, so that you can then showcase to everybody.
Yeah. That's how I learned about Holopin. Um, and so I'm so Hacktoberfest went through a bit of a rough time during 2020, 2021, I think. Um, and I understand why that happened. Uh, people were abusing it for their own to get t-shirts, essentially. They weren't really interested in the code, in the community or anything like that. They were just like, I want a t-shirt. And so people did all kinds of silly things, adding their name to a list, all that kind of stuff. But last year I was very impressed with how they've turned this around. I believe they've listened to what the community and especially maintainers, the complaints they had about this, because that was the other thing. Like a lot of maintainers was just drowned in senseless pull requests that they then had to like filter through and try and figure out what is something I need to actually pay attention to and what is just somebody trying to get a pull request opened, because you don't even have to have it merged to count. So they have done a really good job last year. So I'm happy to endorse it as a great way to get into open source, especially now. I think it's wonderful. And with Holopin added to the mix, it's even more fun. So yeah, I second that. So we've touched on this briefly, and I don't want to dig into it too deep because I think people are kind of sick to hear about chatbots and AI. But at the same time, it's here. It's been talked about everywhere, and I just like to hear your thinking about one specific topic, and that is the sense that especially the jobs of junior developers are going to go away, and as a result of this, I don't quite agree. the more I play with these tools and the more I learn about them, the less confident I am that this is the case. But depending on which bubble you're in on social media, you're gonna either be scared or you're gonna start feeling the way I do. So just in general, like, what do you think about it, just broadly, and then what advice do you have for folks to stay motivated, not lose hope?
AI makes you, and maybe you feel the same way, a lot faster at writing code, especially if you kind of know what you're doing. I mean, that's an important part. But it doesn't, it's in isolation, it does not get you that far. If you're writing something novel, if you're very rarely code, unless you are a level SIO, I forgot his real name. Very rarely is code just like a single file of stuff. A lot of the time, it's infrastructure that touches different parts of the application. There's backend, there's front end, there's databases. If you're working at a bigger company, then you've also have to worry about integrating with these legacy systems, which is honestly all of the big tech companies. Let alone that it's probably going to be a while before those big companies can really even use things like GitHub Copilot due to the data being sent outside and fed right back into the algorithm. So yeah, I feel the same way like as you do. It will eliminate a lot of boring work that folks don't necessarily like to work on. I mean, there are people who are very passionate about tests, but personally, maybe not a huge fan. I think junior developers especially are not necessarily fond of those. They want to just build stuff. I know I want to build stuff. So for things like that, that kind of like tedious, they bring in tons of value. So I think what that means is ultimately you're just going to be writing stuff that matters and that is important. Well, everything's important to our application, but that are sort of those core features or core connectors. When we think about calculators, right? Like all of a sudden, everyone didn't just become a mathematician. You still need to understand the maths to even know what to input into a calculator. And then ultimately, even though we all have Excel and we all have calculators, companies still hire data scientists. So kind of the same logic there. And just to add to that, coding, yes, I think it's absolutely still worth learning. But what we're going to see is perhaps a little bit of a shortage of those universal skills that will always really be valued and forever. So passion and wanting to build things, ability to like see systems from a high level perspective. So literally software engineering or web engineering, communication. So the way that you speak to your colleagues, the way that you can you actually explain what's happening in your code, or can you actually explain what you need to be built, whether you feed that into chatbots or whether you tell that to your colleagues. It probably still helps if you are able to do that. And for that, you do need a lot of that knowledge and go through all the hard work of learning how to code. And written communication, again, not just because we're in a remote culture, but because of all these tools coming up, is important. So I would say, yeah, it's a great tool that you will be able to leverage, or you are already leveraging. But the more you progress, and you will notice yourself progressing, the more you will realize that it's not something that you can trust blindly. And so you still kind of need a bit of that background knowledge.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I do, I do see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, finally something can write my test for me." Um, that's also like this nuanced thing because I listened to somebody the other day talk about specifically tests, and they were like, um, people shouldn't just now do that, use this as a way to get 100% test coverage because that's like one of those things that a lot of people talk about. Like, you should go for 100% test coverage, and it's like you should go for 100% of tests that are meaningful to the code base.
Hmm.
Like, you can write a test for every little thing, but you're probably doing a lot of busy work, which means you're doing stuff that keeps you busy, but it's not really adding any value.
Yeah.
So, and again, here the human thing comes in. You can tell a chatbot like write a bunch of tests, but you still have to evaluate which of those are really valuable and meaningful to add to the project, and is going to be the proper guardrails you need in place so that you can more freely make changes and add new features without having to worry too much about regressions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think I haven't listened to the episode yet, but oh man, now his name's going to escape me. Come on, AI, help me. Let me see.
Sorry, I'm a large
Seth
language
Godin.
model with the data up to 2021.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Seth Godin. He has an episode on his podcast that says how to dance with AI, and he's used that metaphor quite a lot. He's used it in the past, dancing with resistance, as a thing that we touched on earlier in the podcast, like how you work with being uncomfortable, how you work with being afraid, and that kind of thing. And so he's taking that narrative and applying it to AI. So I'm really curious about listening to that, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna have the same kind of message that you just gave here. So yeah, I'll link it up in the show notes if anybody else wants to listen to it. So we're getting close to the end, maybe. I don't know. It feels like we can still go for quite some time. But you mentioned right at the beginning that you are the founder of Holopin. So I've spoken to quite a few folks on the podcast, but also just in the community that are quite keen actually to start their own thing as opposed to necessarily just finding a job at an existing company. So, and as you mentioned, you didn't start with Holopin, you did some other things before that. Why made you decide to, branch out and start your own company? Yeah, just in general, like, did you have like a well thought through plan, or did you just like dive in? Um, any advice for potential new business company owners, founders?
Whatever advice I would give, that would all be confirmation bias. But happy to dive into that. With Holopin, so I think more broadly. So before Holopin, I did consulting, and before that, and during that, I've always kind of dabbled into building ideas and testing ideas. Some of them, I mean, most of them, never really launched. I always wanted that, and I think forever will want build companies. Really, I am very impact driven. I think, no, I know, and I felt that for me the right medium to do that is through doing things that haven't been done before. We talked about being uncomfortable. Again, while you're kind of going through that as a founder, if you're listening to this and if you're going to do it, it's going to be uncomfortable. There are lots of things that you won't know in advance. But just seeing the people around me and having my own experience through just learning a lot through those hard moments and putting yourself in situations that don't feel familiar. Like, it feels really good at the end when you're finally able to overcome it and you're able to see people happily using your product. That brings me so much joy. I really like being almost like incognito. Like, people don't, like, it doesn't matter that whatever my role is, like, somewhere deep down inside, that you kind of, you contributed to this thing. So it really feels like you're serving the community, but it's very rewarding. And so I felt that, for me, building things and having an impact in that way, having a company is, it's, I think it's a question where my kind of answer changes every day. But I just have this thing. And so I mentioned that I've done some other things before. So just as far as advice goes, I can, again, confirmation bias. But some mistakes I made in the past are just coding up the whole product before you even have a validated idea. I had built a 2-sided marketplace for like beauty services. It was an idea that I had for like probably 3 years, and then built it over a couple of months. And, it turned out that nobody actually wanted it. Despite having spoken to lots of different people and people in beauty services, turns out that there's not enough money in the idea because, ultimately you need to think about that. How else are you going to make the company profitable and pay your employees and survive? I also had like a dating app. Quarantine dating. I probably don't have the domain anymore, but it was an interesting test as well. So that would be kind of contrast to what after having those experiences I did with Holopin. So Holopin MVP was mocked up with Canva, just a bunch of stickers on a little rectangle, and that embedded into a GitHub profile. And then I've shown it to some people and just basically listened. Didn't say what it is, just listened what they thought or had to say. And then once you start getting, you maybe tweak things, but then once you start getting a few hits are like, oh yeah, that's cool, like tell me more. Not from your friends. That's another important thing. Not from your friends. Your friends are always going to say that it's a great idea. We support you so much. Your friends, if they're not your target market, they are not going to be ones that will, make your business your business. You need to go to people that you don't know, or people who really are your target market to understand whether, like, how viable it actually is. That was definitely my mistake, I think, with the beauty services. Like, what I should have done is, show them the idea or gave them the app and then send them a payment link, like, basically. That's how you validate. But I didn't do that. And with Holopin, we were in stealth for the first 6 months or so, and that was precisely to do all the validation that there is a business in this. I started with the idea of stickers, and then that kind of evolved through listening to other DevRels and customers, but stayed in stealth from my friends, because there's always the risk of when you tell people that, oh, I started going to the gym, for instance, or oh, I picked up this new hobby, then they say, oh, that's great. And then you kind of get the instant gratification, immediate validation. And then because the dopamine has already hit your brain, you're less kind of motivated to persevere. And also those are not the right things that you should be hearing. I think you should be hearing lots of criticism. Yeah, but then we launched and it turned out well. So, competition, that's also important. Competition is good. If there's no competition, there's a reason why there's no quarantine dating. Or was it Corona Singles? Oh God, I don't remember the actual domain name. But if there's no competition, it's probably because someone already tried it, and there wasn't a business in it.
Good point.
So,
well, I would say if you still own the domain Corona Singles, hang on to it. I think it's going to become valuable. You might be able to flip it for a couple of $1,000s soon.
Baby.
You never know when Corona brings out something called Corona singles. They might just be knocking on your door. I think it's one of the diseases that web developers, maybe developers in general, have, is just buying domains, because you're going to build a thing and then you just end up with a lot of domains.
Yep.
There's actually a browser extension that a previous guest built that is supposed to, whenever you land on one of these domain registration sites, it pops up a little thing that tells you, like, are you sure you want to do this? Do you really need another domain? I think it's
I
called
need
Domain
that.
Goalie. Yeah, I think it's called
Nice.
Domain Goalie. So the fact that exists means that we have a problem. We should maybe stop registering domains.
Yeah.
Elena, this was a great conversation. In closing, what are your hopes for the future, both personally and professionally?
My hopes for the future. I have a very bright outlook on the future. I am excited, professionally about the future and current existence and growth of Holopin. We're launching a couple of additional products soon, so I'm very excited about those. I'm going to go work on the newsletter after this. Personally, so I probably don't think like long term personally, but I'm going to KubeCon in a couple of weeks. Very excited about that. And just summer is great. It's coming. It's almost here. But staying, focused, enjoying the process of working and getting into those uncomfortable situations. Yeah. And probably getting my cat out of the way.
Well, it was great. I wish you all the success with Holopin. I'm looking forward to reading the newsletter. And yeah, thanks for being an awesome guest. It was lovely speaking to you.
Lovely speaking to you as well. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mycelium Network podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Have something to add? Continue the conversation on GitHub and join the community on Slack. Until the next one, keep making the web awesome.